Hello and welcome to Boyle Meets World. I'm your host, as always, Andrew Boyle, and I'm still not funny. Today, we are joined by an incredibly prestigious guest. He's a columnist for The Athletic, as well as his own website, Down Goes Brown. He's been featured on numerous sites such as ESPN and Vice Sports. He's the author of the Down Goes Brown History of the NHL and can be found on Twitter at Down Goes Brown. Please welcome Sean McIndoe. Oh my gosh, I promised I wouldn't mess that one up. I'm sorry.
No worries, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Sean, you and I wouldn't say we have a little bit in common. More so, you inspired me to do something on a lazy Friday due to the quarantine we're all under. So I decided to take it upon myself to figure out which NBA player has the highest single game career high in points that matches his jersey number. And all this was motivated by a similar project that you had done that I'll briefly have you explain your process, how all that went. Essentially, you went about finding which hockey player scored the most goals in a single season in which the total matched their jersey number. So like I said, could you go a little bit into detail on the process, what your experience was like, and then I can give a little spiel on how I felt about doing my project as well.
Yeah. First of all, I should probably apologize to you for inspiring you to go down that road, because having been down it myself, it's that is the way to madness. This literally came up in the way that I described in the post that I ended up writing, which is that very often readers will reach out to me with ideas or things that they think I might be interested in writing about. And some of them are good ideas, and some of them not so much, and some of them work, and some of them might not. This one was a bit of a strange one. It was a reader named Bryce who shot me an email and said, "I'm trying to figure out which NHL player has scored most goals in a season where that total number of goals matched the jersey number that they were wearing that year." And right away, my interest was kind of piqued, because I love weird trivia. I love NHL history. I love any excuse to fire up hockey reference and start digging through stuff. And it seemed like a neat, simple question that should have a pretty straightforward answer. In fact, my first thought was it might be too straightforward. It might just be there might be some obvious answer that everyone's going to figure out right away. That turned out very much not to be the case. I started going down the list. I pulled up the highest scoring single seasons in NHL history, and I started working my way down the list. And the guys at the top of the list, it's Wayne Gretzky, who had a season of 92 goals. That's the NHL record. Wayne Gretzky wore number 99. We all know that. He never scored 99 goals, so he's off the list. And I just started kind of working my way down, and it very quickly became apparent that I was going to run into a problem. And the problem was that if people out there are hockey fans, they would know this, but if they're not hockey fans, guys in the NHL who score a lot of goals tend to fall into two categories when it comes to jersey numbers. They either wear very high numbers, like Wayne Gretzky wearing 99, or Connor McDavid being 97, or Sidney Crosby being 87, Patrick Kane and Eric Lindros wearing 88. That when you have a distinctive high number in the NHL, that's a sign of prestige. That is a sign that you are an elite player, and you kind of have your own cool number. But the problem is those numbers are too high. With the exception of Wayne Gretzky in the wide open 80s, nobody's scoring 97 goals. Nobody's scoring in the 80s in goals. That hasn't happened in a generation. Problem number two was that if you don't have a super high number in the NHL, you tend to have a very low number, a traditional number. Number 9 is the number of Gordie Howe and Rocket Richard. That's a prestigious number to get. There's other ones. Number 19 is another one. Steve Yzerman and guys like that have worn that one. So the vast majority of the star players in NHL history have either worn numbers that are too high or too low as far as us finding a match. And as I kind of started going down the list, it became apparent that this was actually going to be a lot more challenging than I thought. Now, there are two players who stand out in NHL history who were elite offense superstars who wore numbers in the 60s. And that's where I kind of thought this might wind up. And that was Mario Lemieux, of course, wore number 66, and Jaromir Jagr, who wore 68. But as it turns out, Jaromir Jagr hit the highest he ever got to was 62 in a season. And Mario Lemieux actually got more than 66 on several occasions, but never wound up with exactly 66. And you kind of work your way down the list of guys who have scored 70 goals, 60 goals, even get down into 50s. And then I realized, wait a second, there really aren't any star NHL players who've worn numbers in the 50s and 40s. In the NHL, that's a scrubs number. That's the number you get when you get called up from the minors for 2 games and they don't even bother giving you a good number. You get something in the 50s or 40s. Exactly. And so I actually remember there was a point where I was like around in the 50s and I suddenly started to realize I was in some trouble here because this seemingly simple question was potentially not going to wind up being that simple at all. And I just worked my way down through the 50s. Didn't find anybody, didn't find any matches. Worked my way down through the 40s again. You know, it says nobody. There's a small handful of players in NHL history who've been any good who've worn like 47. That's not a great number. And plus, also a lot of the guys who wear numbers in that range are defensemen, so they're not scoring a lot of goals, so they're not going to be your answer. I thought I had it when I got to 44. Because 44, it's a nice amount of goals. It's a lot of goals. It's a big year, but lots of guys have scored 44 goals, especially back in the 80s and 90s when offense was a lot higher. So I had a lot of guys to work with, and 44 is kind of a goal scorer's number. And it's not the number you wear when you're an elite superstar. It's the number you wear when you're like a pretty good goal scorer. Like it's the Stefan Richer number. Rob Brown, guys like that. You know, you're not good enough to wear something in the 80s or 90s, but you still want something a little bit distinctive. The double number in hockey is kind of a sign that you're maybe a little a tier above. And I thought for sure I was going to find it at 44, and I'm going down the list, and the guys who've scored 44 goals in the NHL turn out to be. It's a whole bunch of superstars. It's all these like legendary guys where immediately I'm just going down the list going, I know it's not him. I know it's not him. And finally I get to a name, Glenn Murray of the Boston Bruins. And I think I'll be damned. I don't know why, but I can picture in my head Glenn Murray in a Boston Bruins uniform wearing number 44. I'm like, this is it. I don't know why I know that. I don't know what crucial piece of information got pushed out of my brain at some point in my life. But I know for the Boston Bruins, he scored 44 goals for the Boston Bruins. There I go. This took a lot longer than I thought, but I've got my answer. And I click on Glenn Murray, and I go in and I look on Hockey Reference. And sure enough, he did wear number 44 for the Boston Bruins, but he wore it in the early 90s. And then he got traded, and then he came back. And when he came back, they gave him a different number, and that was the year he scored 44 goals. So he wore 44 and he scored 44, but he didn't do it at the same time. And that is the point where I kind of felt like I was going to flip my laptop and just, but at this point I'm in too deep and I just keep going and going. And you see it in the article, like it starts off as here's a fun trivia question. And it much like your attempt to do something similar from the NBA perspective, it just ends up being this descent into madness it feels more like a Twilight Zone episode than any kind of Stump the Schwab thing. But I won't give away the answer. I did eventually get there. There was a point where I was starting to wonder if maybe that I was just doomed to keep going on and on and on forever until I got down to the number 0. But there is an answer in there. And I wrote it up, and everybody seemed to enjoy it, and people had a lot of fun laughing at my mental and emotional breakdown as I chased after this. But I ended up having to go over 1,000 names deep on a list that I had initially worried was going to be over too quickly because it was going to be too obvious.
And I will say, and this won't give it away, but knowing your hockey background and your fan allegiance, I know
Yeah.
you're surprised when you saw the name and you found your answer.
It doesn't end up just being some random no name.
Right.
It does end up being the sort of thing that I probably should have seen coming,
Hmm.
but I have to admit that I did not.
Yeah. Well, the wild thing about this is 44 was my stumper too, and I know we got to get going here, but basically 44 was the number I thought for the longest time was it, and I found a player, Bojan Bogdanovic, who played for my Indiana Pacers. In 2016, he scored 44 points, wearing number 44, and he's worn 44 his entire career, and 44 is his career high. Until I came across an issue with um, a player that shared a name with another player who scored higher than him. And again, I mean, I'm not going to go into detail. We'll have people read my thread and read your article, but I mean, it's 44 is a curse number for us. Is all I'm going to say. I'm never going to pick that as a lottery number
And
for certain. 44, I'm going to stay away from.
and the other part of this that just to kind of round off the symmetry, because I'm guessing you probably found the same thing. As soon as I wrote this and as soon as I got the answer, people start throwing other questions at me.
Yes,
What about points? What about assists? What about this or that? And one of the ones that somebody came up with was, what about baseball? Who's got the most home runs matching their jersey number?
I've gotten the same request. I mean,
And as it turns out, the answer to that, what else is 44?
yeah,
It's two guys. It's Willie McCovey did it once, but Hank Aaron, the most famous 44 in baseball history, who hit 44 home runs on the nose like multiple times,
yeah, I think
like
it was
3 or 4 or 5 times. It was kind of his trademark. So yeah, when you sit down to do this sort of thing, apparently 44 is either the magic number or the curse number, I guess, depending on which way you're looking at it.
So my problem was I must enjoy hating myself for whatever reason. I decided I was going to do a career high because obviously David Robinson, who played for the San Antonio Spurs, scored 50 wearing number 50. That would have been my answer right there. But no, I had to take it a step further and I had to go off of career high. But anyway, if I ever do this again, I'm definitely not going to do career high. But leading to my next question, like you said, you've had people reach out to you like, what's your next project? What's your next thing you're going to work on? And coincidentally enough, the same Bryce that emailed you to get you onto your topic responded to my tweet and asked me what my next project's going to be as well. So we both got our Bryce. We both got Bryced.
Curse you, Bryce.
The same
Bryce,
exact
I'm
Bryce.
going to track you down someday and get my revenge.
So do you think, I don't, my next question is, do you think you ever do something like this again, whether it's in your own free time or if a listener or a reader asks you to do something like this and it's something that catches your attention, or are you just so burned out on it you don't think you'd ever pick up something like this again?
You know what? I love getting ideas from readers, especially these days.
Mhm.
As you know, as somebody who's writing several times a week about sports in a world where there is no sports to write about anymore,
Mhm.
I'm not turning up my nose at any ideas. I'm happy to get them, and if anyone thinks they've got a similar kind of stumper, uh, I'm happy to take a look at it. I've got some interesting things that I'm sort of halfway towards working on at this point. I'm not going to write. I will never write them up the same way I did this one.
Mhm.
I think that's kind of a one-time thing. I don't think it would work as well if I tried to do the same thing again. But I'm certainly, if people have questions or challenges or just need ideas, I'm happy to hear them at any time, at the best of times, but certainly these days, because the jar of ideas is running a little low for a lot of us
Sure.
right about now.
That's kind of that's a bit of the situation I found myself in. I mean, I've been reading you for a while since I've subscribed to The Athletic. I've read the article, and I know I tweeted this at you, but I thought to myself, how hard could this really be? I enjoyed the article, but I thought, NHL is probably twice as old as the NBA. This shouldn't be that terribly difficult. And I was completely wrong. And obviously I don't do this for a living. This was just for fun for me. And I can definitely say I'm not going to do this ever again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was one of those. It kind of felt like a one in a million thing where and good old Bryce. I don't even think knew what he was getting us into, but it just ended up being that perfect combination of the weird way that the NHL does things in terms of the jersey numbers, and just this perfect question that kind of threaded the needle into something much stranger than it should have been, and
Mhm.
it was a lot of fun, and yeah, it is. As much as I joke about tracking Bryce down someday, I probably do owe the guy a beer.
You and me both. Hey, last question. I'll get you out of here. Could you talk a little bit about the meaning and symbolism of "Down Goes Brown"? I mean, I know where it came from. I mean, it's a famous call from a famous hockey fight, but I mean, is there anything like basically what led to you sticking with "Down Goes Brown"? Is there any sort of symbolism for you?
It's not really. This dates back to it's my Twitter handle now, but
Mhm.
it dates back to actually when I first started a blog back in 2008, I want to say. And I remember back then, I had no plans for it to turn into anything other than giving me an outlet to do some writing. I had always been I'd always been a writer, even though I had not figured out a way to do that as a job. I was the guy who would write the way too in-depth season previews for the
Mhm.
fantasy football league, or that kind of thing, and
Sure.
send it around, and people would be like, okay, thanks, that was a little weird, but we'll take it. And when blogs started becoming a thing, I thought, okay, this sounds good. And I remember sitting there and setting one up and then staring at the field that said, like, what do you want to call your blog? And I was just like, what the hell do I want to call this? And I remembered a few things. I remember one of my favorite bands is Nine Inch Nails, and I remember Trent Reznor saying that when you're picking a name for your band, it's got to be something. It's got to be short. It's got to be memorable. It's got to abbreviate well. And I remember also thinking, if people are going to type this in, it's got to be something that's easy to spell. I can't be throwing anything in there that people are going to spell it wrong when they're typing
Mm.
it in. And back then, a lot of the blogs that were doing well had names in them. It was stuff like Fire Joe Morgan was real big at the time. Kissing Susie Colbert was another one.
Mm.
It was something and then a name. And I was kicking around, and then suddenly that famous call from Joe Bowen popped into my head of Down Goes Brown. Now it's 1992. Leafs are playing the Blackhawks. A fight breaks out. Sylvain Lefebvre, who's a defensive defenseman on the Leafs, squares off with Rob Brown, who's this really flashy superstar guy with the Blackhawks. And we didn't think Rob Brown knew how to fight, and we weren't sure if Sylvain Lefebvre knew how to fight, but we found out very quickly that only one of them did, because Sylvain Lefebvre basically KO'd him, center ice, Maple Leaf Gardens. I happened to be at the game.
Oh my God.
Place is going nuts. You got to remember, this is the 1992 Maple Leafs. This is before they made their playoff runs and that sort of. So we didn't have a lot to cheer for back then. Like, you kind of took your highlights where you could get them. So winning a fight against a guy who didn't even fight very often was that passed as a highlight for us. Joe Bowen, who's the Maple Leafs' very excitable play-by-play guy, starts yelling, down goes Brown," which is of course, a play on the famous "Down Goes Frazier" call from the
Mhm.
boxing world. And it's just the sort of thing that kind of stuck with Leaf fans. It was the sort of thing that we'd kind of throw back at each other every now and then. I remember popping in, going, "Okay, that checks all the boxes. It's easy. People are going to remember it." I typed it in, and off we went. And that was it. I mean, it's 5 minutes of thought went into it. But the thing that happened was, as soon as I started writing, it was very hard to find any kind of audience. I mean, that's the way it goes when you're starting off. But I kept hearing from people who'd say, I get these emails or these messages or comments left on the blog, and people go, "I have no idea who you are. I have no idea what this site is. But as soon as I saw the title, I knew I had to check it out, because I remember that fight, and the fact that there's somebody else who remembers it 20 years later or whatever it is. I have a feeling that, like, you and I are on the same wavelength, so I'm going to check out your stuff." And it was. I wish I could say that I put a lot of thought into it and really knocked it out of the park. I didn't. It was 5 minutes of staring at a blank screen and going, this is good enough. But it did seem to kind of resonate with a certain element of that Leafs fan base, and that ended up becoming the foundation that I was able to slowly but surely build a little bit of a bigger audience on.
Sure. And I know now on your website, and I'll humble brag for you, I know you said that you get a million visitors to your website per year. So, I mean, it's turned into a little bit more than just Leafs fans at this point, I would say.
Yeah, and it has, and I've been extremely fortunate and to be able to over the years turn it into something that I now get to do as a full-time job. It was it was a fun hobby, and if and I was more than willing to do it for free when it was just the fantasy football preview. So I'm more than happy to be able to continue to do the same sort of thing I used to do for fun and still have fun with it, but also be able to pay the bills.
Sure. And my last thing I got to ask, just a follow-up question. How many times have you had your son watch that fight?
You know what? I'm trying to think how many times he would have seen it. Probably not that many, because
Really?
he's my son, he's 9 years old now, and if you know any 9-year-olds, they're all about YouTube. They're all over it. But we have a rule in the house, which is he's allowed to watch hockey stuff, but no violence, no injuries, nothing like that. I don't need him finding Clint Malarchuk when he's alone without mom or dad around. So he probably hasn't seen it too many times. I'm sure he maybe has seen it once or twice, but between his schedule of watching the Wendell Clark All Heart video 8 hours a day, mandatory as dad forces him to, there's not a lot of time left over for other hockey fights. So he probably hasn't seen it too many times.
Okay. Well, also, I'm going to make sure that I plug your AMA. Your AMA on Reddit was phenomenal. That's how that's where I was able to learn a little bit more about you outside of just what I read. I'll be sure to plug that as well with my posts of this podcast. But yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate you taking time today, Sean. Huge fan. Like I said, I've been reading you for a while now, and I really appreciate you taking the time to, number one, talk to me today, but also to inspire me to do something crazy.
Yeah, right on. And hopefully it didn't make you too crazy, but it was, I enjoyed that Twitter thread a lot. And it was very cool to see something that I had done on the hockey side taken in a different direction where I wouldn't have thought to have it go. So that was very cool. Thank you for having me on, and I hope people check out the article if they haven't seen it. It's on The Athletic. It's behind the paywall, but there's a 90 days free right now, so you can read not just my piece and my stuff, but the stuff of pretty much every other sports writer who's out there these days is all there. So I know a lot of us are looking to kill some time these days if you want to read some really good sports writing, and as well as some really weird stuff that a lot of us have got coming over the next little while. Go grab your free trial now, and we'll have you covered for the next few months.
And then hopefully it turns into something, because it's really not that expensive to have a subscription to The Athletic, and it's great articles.
That's the idea, yeah.
Okay, well, Sean McIndoe, I think I got it right that time.
You did, yeah. You nailed it.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate your time. That's going to do it for the Boyle Meets World podcast today. We will see you in the next one.